It is the first day of May. And as we start this new month, let's get you all the information that you need to take on this month. Let's start with the first day today. Right here on Community Radio Networks, we have all the information that you need. Let's start with the world news that is coming up for you. This is Community Radio Networks and the World News, read by Shabnam Matgil. Dueling groups of protesters clashed this morning at the University of California, Los Angeles, grappling in fist fights and shoving, kicking and using sticks to beat one another. Hours earlier, police burst into a building at the Columbia University that pro-Palestinian protesters took over and broke up a demonstration that had paralyzed the school while inspiring others. After a couple of hours of scuffles between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli demonstrators at UCLA, police wearing helmets and face shields formed lines and slowly separated the groups, and that appeared to quell the violence. Tent encampments of protesters calling on universities to stop doing business with Israel or companies that support the war in Gaza have spread across the country in a student movement unlike any other in the 21st century, reaching from New York to Texas and California. The ensuing crackdown by police on some college campuses has stirred echoes of the much larger student protest movement during the Vietnam War era. There have been confrontations with law enforcement and more than 1,000 arrests. In rarer instances, university officials and protest leaders struck agreements to restrict the disruption to campus life and upcoming commencement ceremonies. The clashes at UCLA took place around this tent encampment built by pro-Palestinian protesters who erected barricades and plywood for protection while counter-protesters tried to pull them down. Video showed fireworks exploding over and in the encampment and people throwing chairs, and at one point a group piled on a person who lay on the ground, kicking and beating them with sticks until others pulled them out of that scrum. And we have had Brown University, another member of the Ivy League, reaching an agreement yesterday with protesters on its Rhode Island campus. Demonstrators said they would close their encampment in exchange for administrators taking a vote to consider divestment from Israel in October. Meanwhile, at the Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, police in riot gear closed in on this encampment late last night and arrested about 20 people for trespassing. At least one of them was thrown to the ground. University officials had warned earlier in the day that students would face criminal charges if they did not disperse. And dozens of New York City police officers entered the Columbia University campus last night after student protesters overtook an administrative building earlier in the day. The students who were arrested and led out of the building by police are expected to face charges, including trespassing and criminal mischief. The development marks an escalation in campus tensions over the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. Columbia University officials threatening academic expulsion of students who seized and occupied a classroom building, intensifying a nearly 2-week standoff between administrators and pro-Palestinian activists on the Manhattan campus. The White House denounced the non-peaceful efforts to protest the bombardment in Gaza as students at Columbia University occupied the campus building. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has kicked off a series of meetings with Israeli leaders discussing how to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza, while at the same time repeatedly urging Hamas to accept a deal offer that will release hostages and achieve a ceasefire. Following visits to Riyadh and Amman earlier this week, the top U.S. diplomat is now in Israel for the final stop of his wider Middle East tour. It is his 7th visit to the region, which was plunged into conflict on the 7th of October when Hamas attacked Israel. Top U.S. diplomat urging Hamas to accept a truce in the Gaza Strip after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to send troops into its far southern city of Rafah. He has pledged to launch an incursion into the southern Gaza city, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are sheltering from the almost 7-month-long war. Just as ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas appear to be gaining steam. Israeli army radio has reported that the military, in preparation for its ground assault on Rafah, will announce a new safe zone in central Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister has sharply criticized the possible issuing of arrest warrants against him and other Israelis by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. If the court were to issue the warrants, it would be an unprecedented anti-Semitic hate crime, he said in a video address yesterday. Such a step would violate Israel's right to self-defense following the Hamas massacre and he spoke of a distortion of justice and history and insisted that the possible arrest warrants would have no influence on Israel's deployment in the Gaza Strip. Judges at the International Court of Justice ruled against issuing emergency orders to stop German arms exports to Israel while expressing deep concern about catastrophic living conditions in Gaza, but the court also rejected a German request to throw out the case so it can now move forward. It is Nicaragua that had asked the International Court of Justice, also known as the World Court, to order Germany to halt military arms exports to Israel and resume its funding of the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency. Fighting between the Shiite militia Hezbollah and Israel is plunging tens of thousands of children and young people and their families into misery in southern Lebanon. Almost daily airstrikes from Israel are destroying the livelihoods of the people, many of whom were already living in precarious conditions. And we do have a European Union's foreign policy chief revealing at the World Economic Forum that 5 European Union members, including Spain, Ireland, Belgium, Slovenia and Malta may recognize Palestinian statehood by the end of this month. This development follows a recent European Arab meeting in Riyadh focusing on a two-state solution. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister's stance against unilateral recognition received support from the Knesset amid criticism from Israel over European Union nations' stance. France's foreign minister traveling to Cairo in an unscheduled stop during a Middle East tour as efforts to secure a truce between Israel and Hamas in Gaza have reached a critical point. Human rights group Amnesty International called this week for President Biden to immediately suspend the transfer of weapons to Israel as the organization renewed allegations that the Israeli military is violating international law. The Senate yesterday passed a long-delayed $95 billion package with wide bipartisan support after both sides of Capitol Hill have struggled for months to send aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, and that final vote yesterday was 79 to 18. 15 Republicans voted with 3 Democrats against the bill. 48 Democrats and 31 Republicans voted for the bill. The first week of testimony in Donald Trump's hush money trial was the scene setter for jurors. This week, prosecutors are working on filling in the details of how they say he pulled off a scheme to bury damaging stories to protect his 2016 presidential campaign. Prosecutors are setting the stage for crucial testimony from Trump's former attorney Michael Cohen, who arranged hush money payments on Trump's behalf for going to prison for campaign finance violations and other crimes. Trump denies any wrongdoing and has pleaded not guilty. New York Judge Juan Merchan has fined the former President Donald Trump for repeatedly violating the gag order in the hush money trial. He ruled that Trump violated the gag order 9 times for criticizing expected trial witnesses in posts on social media and his campaign page, and he must pay the $9,000 fine by the end of the week. The judge has also threatened incarceration if Trump willfully violates the gag order again. I beg your pardon. The judge presiding over the former President Trump's hush money case issued a decision on whether or not he can attend his son's high school graduation in Florida this month. He addressed that request made by Trump at the start of the trial proceedings for the 17th of May. And the judge told the court that he doesn't think that the 17th of May would be a problem. Donald Trump will use a one-day break from his hush money trial today to rally voters in the battleground states of Wisconsin and Michigan, a day after he was held in contempt of court and threatened with jail time for violating a gag order. His remarks will be closely watched after he received a $9,000 fine for making public statements about people connected to the case. In imposing the fine for posts on Trump's Truth Social account and campaign website, the judge said if Trump continued to violate his orders, he will impose an incarceratory punishment. A ban on abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy took effect in Florida today, just after midnight. Before that, the state had been a refuge for abortion access in the South after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Florida banned abortions after 15 weeks in 2022, but the vast majority of its neighboring states had stricter restrictions, so more than 9,300 people traveled to Florida last year for abortion care. Right here in North Texas, the Carroll High School and the Carroll Senior High School in Southlake are closed today following an anonymous threat. The Carroll ISD says the threat was reported through the Stop It system last night. Health officials are turning up the alarm over rapidly increasing cases of measles spreading around the world, and experts are worried the U.S. is on the cusp of another massive outbreak like we experienced in 2019. The number of measles cases worldwide has nearly doubled from 22 to 23 and according to the latest data from the World Health Organization, so far this year almost 100,000 cases have been reported globally. At least 6 people have died and more than a dozen are missing after storms caused flooding in the southern Brazilian state of Rio Grande do Sul. Helicopters flying over the region searching for people who have been left stranded, and in some areas the flooding is so severe that helicopters have been unable to land and have had to winch residents to safety. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has said that hundreds of thousands of pieces of ammunition have gone missing from 2 military bases in the South American country. He said that an inspection this month by the army found that hundreds of thousands of bullets, thousands of grenades, and 37 anti-tank missiles were stolen from a military base in the center of the country and another near the Caribbean coast. Kenyans living in areas at risk of flooding or landslides will be asked to evacuate today. William Ruto, the president, was speaking north of Nairobi, where an overflow reservoir has wiped out a swath of houses and swept dozens of people to their death. It's not time for guesswork, he said, noting the forecast for more heavy rain. And a senior Islamic State group commander wanted in connection with one of the deadliest attacks on U.S. forces in Africa was killed in an operation by Mali's security forces. Abu Huzaifa, known by the allies Higo, was a commander in the group known as the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, and the State Department had announced a reward of up to $5 million for information about him. Over 7 million people in South Sudan are expected to face acute food insecurity or worse during the lean season between now and July, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's report this morning. And Ukraine's massive weekend drone attack on a Russian airbase deep behind enemy lines suggests Kyiv may be trying to curb the threat of Moscow's devastating glide bombs. Russia has increasingly relied on the glide bomb strikes to hammer Ukrainian positions in recent months. Warsaw's main synagogue was attacked with firebombs last night by an unknown perpetrator, but sustained minimal damage and nobody was hurt, according to Poland's chief rabbi. The incident was strongly condemned by political leaders in this news out of Warsaw. The world should establish a set of rules to regulate AI weapons while they are still in their infancy, according to a global conference calling the issue an Oppenheimer moment of the time. Like gunpowder and the atomic bomb, artificial intelligence has the capacity to revolutionize warfare, making human disputes unimaginably different and a lot more deadly. This news out of Vienna, where Austria is organizing and hosting a 2-day conference which brought together 1,000 participants, including political leaders, experts, and members of civil society from more than 140 countries. The European Union is marking the 20th anniversary of 10 countries in Eastern Europe joining the bloc as the 3rd year of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine continued. Cyprus, Czechia, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia joined the European Union out of a fierce desire to become part of the freedom and prosperity. And this was being celebrated. Europe was more than a geography. It is an idea, a journey, a beacon of hope, according to Charles Michel, the European Council president. Paceman Jofra Archer was recalled to England's squad for the defense of their T20 World Cup crown after a year out of action. And the 29-year-old, who has endured a string of injuries since his international breakthrough in 2019, has not played competitive cricket for a year, but has recovered from a right elbow injury. New Zealand cricket said it will go ahead with a test match against Afghanistan in September, a month after Australia scrapped a 2020 series against the same opponents. And Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has said today that he will stress the need for a rules-based international order in the face of global challenges and tensions when he attends a meeting of the Organizations for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. He began a 6-day trip abroad in Paris, where he's scheduled to give a keynote speech tomorrow, the first of a 2-day OECD ministerial meeting, which will be chaired by Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa. And South Korea is considering sharing advanced military technology with the United States, the UK and Australia through the so-called AUKUS partnership. We have at least 24 people who've died after part of a highway collapsed due to heavy rains in southern China's Guangdong province this morning, a densely populated industrial powerhouse. That area has been lashed by rainstorms in recent weeks, causing severe flooding and landslides in some areas. A Chinese spacecraft has returned to Earth yesterday, with 3 astronauts who completed a 6-month mission aboard the country's orbiting space station. The Shenzhou 17 craft carrying these 3 landed at the Dongfeng site in North China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region in the Gobi Desert shortly before 6 p.m. yesterday, and comes roughly 4 days after the Shenzhou 18 mission docked with the station with their 3-member replacement crew. China marked a significant milestone in its naval expansion with the maiden sea trial of the Fujian, its largest and most sophisticated aircraft carrier to date. Departing from Shanghai's Jiangnan shipyard, the Fujian represents the latest advancement in China's growing naval capabilities, reflecting its broader strategic ambitions in the Pacific region and beyond. Vietnam's National Assembly will convene tomorrow for a special meeting to discuss personnel issues after its chairman resigned last week. The Communist Party's Central Committee accepted the resignation days after his assistant was detained in relation to a corruption probe. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Community Radio Networks, and authorities this morning began evacuating about 1,200 residents after Indonesia's Mount Ruang volcano erupted, spewing ash and rocks. Located in the Sangihe Islands arc in North Sulawesi province, it has been increasingly active in recent weeks. Khalsa Day festivities in Canada's Toronto were marked by slogans raised in favor of the Khalistan movement during a speech by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The festival of Vaisakhi honors the founding of the Sikh community known as the Khalsa in 1699 and marks the beginning of a new solar year and the harvesting season. Loud chants were raised in the celebrations attended by thousands amid the presence of the Canadian Premier, opposition leaders, and also others. We have India, meanwhile, summoning the Canadian Deputy High Commissioner and expressing deep concern and strong protest after these separatist slogans were raised. The U.S. State Department stated that it expects India to address the alleged involvement of senior Indian officials in assassination attempts within the United States. We continue to expect accountability from the government of India based on the results of the Indian Inquiry Committee's work, and we are regularly working with them and inquiring for additional updates, said the department's principal deputy spokesperson Vedant Patel during a news briefing in Washington. He emphasized that the U.S. continues to raise our concerns directly with the Indian government at senior levels. Our Washington Post report presented the clearest link yet between India's government and a thwarted assassination attempt targeting a Sikh activist in the U.S. last year. And the report outlined the involvement of Indian intelligence officials in other assassinations in Canada and Pakistan. According to defense officials, the missile system is being developed for the Indian Navy by the Defense Research and Development Organization. And this supersonic missile-assisted torpedo system is a next-generation standoff torpedo delivery system designed to enhance the Navy's anti-submarine warfare capabilities. More than 80 schools in the Delhi NCR have received a bomb threat via email this morning. The investigation agencies believe that the email was sent from a server in Russia, and all the 6 schools received the email from a single IP address. Panic gripping the region after multiple schools received this bomb threat emails, prompting the evacuation of students from nearly 50 schools, with authorities, including the police, disposal squads, and the fire services, swiftly responding. Tensions rising as this viral note hints at potential bloodshed in the capital. However, extensive searches have revealed no bombs in any school, leading to investigations declaring that the threats may be hoaxes. The Election Commission today reviewed the preparedness for the third phase of the Lok Sabha election scheduled on the 7th of this month. Also released the final voter turnout figures for the first and second phases, 66.1% and 66.7% respectively, days after completion of the polls. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee today expressed her disapproval of the Election Commission's delayed release of the final voter turnout numbers for the first two phases of the Lok Sabha and voiced her worries about the abrupt rise in polling percentages during those phases. National Conference President Dr. Farooq Abdullah took a dig at the Election Commission of India for postponing the polling in the Anantnag Rajouri Lok Sabha seat to the 25th of May. He maintained that they have the full support of people of the constituency. Karnataka government has been accused of delayed action regarding a sex video case allegedly involving MP Prajwal Revanna, leading to a heated debate between Congress and BJP with questions raised about political motives. Karnataka Chief Minister Siddaramaiah today wrote to Prime Minister Modi requesting him to direct the Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Home Affairs to cancel the diplomatic passport issued to JDS leader Prajwal Revanna. He also blamed leader Dev Gowda for sending his grandson and Hassan MP Prajwal Revanna out of the country amid ongoing obscene video case controversies. Congress General Secretary Jairam Ramesh today said that the party will finalize the candidates from Amethi and Raebareli for the Lok Sabha election in the next 24 to 30 hours. And the Delhi High Court today dismissed a petition that sought to compel the Election Commission of India to develop a mechanism allowing political leaders and candidates to campaign virtually with reasonable restrictions. Indian Meteorological Department today said that the average minimum temperature in April for east and northeast India hit a record high of 22 degrees Celsius and was the highest since 1901. Anuj Thapan, the man accused of providing the firearms used in the shooting incident outside Salman Khan's home on the 14th of April, has died after allegedly attempting suicide in custody at the crime branch lockup in the police commissioner's office in Mumbai this morning. And Chief of Army Staff in Pakistan, General Asim Munir, met his British counterpart, General Sir Patrick Sanders, where the two discussed measures to further elevate bilateral defence relations. In the meeting, which was also attended by CGS designate of the UK Army General Sir Roland Walker, both sides discussed matters of professional interest and measures to further elevate bilateral defence relations. In a fresh twist in the Cypher case, the Islamabad High Court observed that the FIA has nothing on record to prove that former Prime Minister Imran Khan retained the confidential diplomatic cable and that it went missing from his possession. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the world news for you. I do have your financial news coming up in a separate segment. Stay with us right here and give me a minute to get that to you. Let's get you all the financial news that you need to know today. Today is the 1st of May, and as we get this month started, welcome to Community Radio Networks. We'll start the financial news with our foreign currency exchange rates. We have the Indian rupee at 83.48, Pakistani rupee 278.34, Bangladeshi taka at 109.76, Sri Lankan rupee 298.13, and the Nepalese rupee at 133.63. The British pound at 0.80, the euro at 0.94, the Canadian dollar is 1.38. The Australian dollar is 1.54. Mexican peso 17.07, Chinese yuan 7.24, Japanese yen 157.52, Russian ruble 91.85, the Thai baht at 37.12, and the Turkish lira at 32.53. We do have stocks tumbling into the close yesterday, a fitting end to the year's most challenging month for investors. For the last month of April, the S&P 500 lost 4%, while the Dow lost 4.5%, marking its worst month since September 2022. U.S. stocks are mired in the red this morning as disappointing earnings dented AI hopes, while investors waited for the Federal Reserve's policy decision and clues to chances for rate cuts. S&P 500 futures fell 0.4% this morning, while Dow Jones Industrial Average futures shed 0.2%. Contracts on the tech-heavy Nasdaq 100 led the way lower with a 0.6% drop. The options market is more concerned about a potentially big move in the S&P 500 index of the Federal Reserve's interest rate decision today than it's been at any point in almost a year. The benchmark index is implied to move 0.95% today when the Fed gives its view on rates and Chair Jeremy Powell holds his post-meeting press conference. The Federal Reserve widely expected to keep the interest rates at a 23-year high today, but investors will be listening for any signs of how long they will have to wait before rate cuts can begin. A closely tracked wage growth metric hit its highest level in a year during the first quarter, fueling concerns that sticky inflation may be pervasive and prompt the Federal Reserve to hold interest rates steady for longer than initially hoped. The wave of mass layoffs have swept across some of the world's largest companies last month, with tech titans like Tesla, Google, and Apple forced to cut thousands of jobs, and so far more than 70,000 people have lost their jobs in the tech sector this year. A group of newspapers, including the New York Daily News and Chicago Tribune, have sued Microsoft and OpenAI in a federal court, accusing them of misusing reporters' work to train their generative artificial intelligence systems. The 8 newspapers, owned by hedge fund Alden Global Capital's Media News Group, saw in the lawsuit that the companies unlawfully copied millions of their articles to train AI products, including Microsoft's Copilot and OpenAI's ChatGPT. GPT. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration will move to reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug, a historic shift to generations of American drug policy that could have wide ripple effects across the country. And then AstraZeneca, the pharmaceutical giant which virtually became a household name during the COVID-19 pandemic, has admitted that its Covishield vaccine could cause rare side effects, including blood clots and low platelet count. The pharma giant is being sued in a class action over claims that its vaccine, developed with the University of Oxford, caused death and serious injury in dozens of cases. Covishield was developed by the British-Swedish company in collaboration with Oxford University and produced by the Serum Institute of India, widely administered in over 150 countries. Pfizer lifted its annual profit forecast, banking on cost cuts, a smaller than feared drop in sales for its COVID antiviral treatment, and strong demand for pneumonia vaccines, sending its shares up about 2% before the bell this morning. And it is CVS Health Corporation that slashed its annual profit forecast and missed Wall Street estimates for first quarter earnings today, as elevated demand for non-urgent procedures increased medical costs at its health insurance business. Binance founder Changpeng Zhao was sentenced to 4 months in prison for violating U.S. money laundering laws and federal sanctions at the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. The sentence is less than the 3 years prosecutors had sought in the 12 to 18-month sentencing guidelines for that crime. Elon Musk's abrupt decision to lay off employees who ran Tesla's electric vehicle charging business blindsided automakers gearing up to equip new EVs for customers to use the Tesla supercharger network. For now, General Motors, Ford, and other automakers which struck deals last year to give customers access to the network said they are not changing their plans. Tesla's decision to open its network to rival EV manufacturers was hailed by President Biden and opened the door for Tesla to get federal subsidies to expand the reach of its North American charging standard system. Yum Brands reported a fall in quarterly global same-store sales today, hurt by choppy demand for its KFC and Pizza Hut brands from inflation-weary consumers in the U.S. as well as in the overseas markets. And Kraft Heinz missed Wall Street expectations for first quarter sales today as inflation-weary consumers push back on higher prices of its branded lunch combos, meat cold cuts, and mac and cheese. Shares were down 4% before the bell today, even as the packaged food maker kept unchanged its fiscal year 2024 targets. Starbucks reported weaker than expected quarterly earnings and revenue, fueled by a surprise decline in same-store sales. The coffee chain also slashed its forecast for its fiscal 2024 earnings and revenue, predicting that its cafes would keep underperforming for several quarters, and shares of the company fell 12% in extended trading. Shares of Advanced Micro Devices and Supermicro Computer have sank this morning, sparking a sell-off in chip stocks after their earnings disappointed investors who have piled into the sector on hopes rising AI investments would boost demand. AMD down more than 6% in pre-market trading today and is on course to lose more than $16 billion in market value. Estee Lauder Companies lowered its revenue outlook for the remainder of the year, citing continued challenges in China. The company today noted ongoing weakness in prestige beauty in mainland China in the most recent quarter, and the shares have fallen 6.3% in pre-market trading in New York, and revenue at duty-free shops, mainly in China, appear to have turned a long-awaited corner, with sales up by strong double digits. And the company now expects sales to decline as much as 3% compared with the prior forecast for a range of down 1%. WeWork has reached a $450 million restructuring deal that would help the co-working space operator emerge from Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection by the end of this month. Company and co-founder and former CEO Adam Newman is not involved, despite having wanted to buy back his former company. This buyback offer was via Flow, an apartment rental startup that he launched with big backing from Andreessen Horowitz. A recent research report commissioned by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise sheds light on the prevailing overconfidence among IT leaders regarding their organization's readiness to harness the benefits of artificial intelligence. According to these findings, nearly half, 44% of surveyed IT leaders believe their companies are fully equipped to leverage AI's potential. The hottest iPhone app in America may owe its popularity to government crackdowns on Apple. The app, called Delta, lets you play old-school video games like Super Mario Bros. On an iPhone. Apple had banned apps like it for years, but unbanned them this month without much explanation. Delta's creators say growing anti-monopoly pressures were responsible for Apple's flip-flop. The EPA has said it has finalized a ban on consumer uses of methylene chloride, a chemical that is widely used as a paint stripper, but is known to cause liver cancer and other health problems. EPA said its action will protect Americans from health risks while allowing certain commercial uses to continue with robust worker protections. Gibson Farms has recalled organic light halves and pieces of shelled walnuts because they have been linked to an outbreak of E. coli infections. The organic walnuts were distributed in natural food stores and co-ops in the following states: Alaska, Arkansas, Arizona, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Idaho, Kansas, Louisiana, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, Nevada, Oregon, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. As of today, there are 12 confirmed patients in the outbreak of E. coli. Taylor Swift has dominated all 10 spots on Billboard's Hot 100 chart once before with Midnights, and now the pop star is claiming the top 14 spots for her newest era, the Tortured Poets Department. The pistol, owned by the notorious Prohibition-era gangster Al Capone, which he nicknamed Sweetheart, is once again up for auction, where it is expected to sell for $2 to $3 million. The Capone family has stressed the importance of the firearm, saying that it routinely protected his life. And Richmond Auctions opening this bid on the .45 Colt semi-automatic pistol on the 18th of this month, less than 3 years after it sold for just over $1 million. Dating apps don't work for everyone when they're looking for the one to marry. For Al Gilberti, he's going more old school to find Miss Right. He's spending $400 a week for a big billboard along a street in Sweetwater. It says, "Lonely male can relocate Sweetwater, seeks female marriage-minded, enjoying karaoke." The billboard is working. He's already gotten more than 400 phone calls and 50 emails in just a couple of weeks. However, he says most of the calls are coming from people looking to see how much he's worth. He still has hope. The Supreme Court refused to block a Texas law requiring pornographic websites to verify the age of their users. The justices rejected an emergency appeal filed by the Free Speech Coalition, a trade association for adult entertainment industry, and the provision of House Bill 1181 signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott remains in effect even as the association's full appeal is weighed by the Supreme Court. There were no noted dissents from the court's one-sentence order, and similar age verification laws have passed in other states also. The Texas law carries fines up to $10,000 per violation that could be raised up to $250,000 per violation by a minor. Housing affordability continues to be a conundrum for many Americans, both from the perspective of renting and buying. Recent findings from a comprehensive bank rate study indicate a significant tilt towards renting being more economical than buying, particularly in large metropolitan areas, specifically in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. The contrasts in cost were particularly notable. Cost roughly 73% more to own a monthly basis than to rent, according to this report. And the study found the typical monthly rent in North Texas to be $1,765, while the typical monthly mortgage cost is now $3,044. McDonald's has reported a modest increase in quarterly profits despite a boycott stemming from the Middle East. Conflict there expected to drag on sales for the foreseeable future. Ethiopian Airlines expects to carry 30% more passengers in the year that ended June from the year before, according to its chief executive, buoyed by new routes and a rebound in global travel. And the European Union said that it's investigating Facebook and Instagram for suspected violations of the bloc's digital rulebook, including not doing enough to protect users from foreign disinformation ahead of EU-wide elections. International companies cannot responsibly operate in Xinjiang and should leave the Western Chinese region due to forced labor concerns, according to a U.S. Labor Department official in Washington this morning. The U.S. government says Chinese officials continue to commit genocide and crimes against humanity against Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang, and rights groups have pressured Western companies there to audit their operations over forced labor concerns. China's government vehemently denies allegations of abuses. China threatening to take resolute and forceful steps to defend itself after President Biden recently signed that bill that provides foreign aid to Taiwan and forces TikTok's China-based owner to set the app or be banned in the United States. If you look at your Google Doodle today, Mina Alexander is being featured out there. The month of May is Asia Pacific American Heritage Month. And as we started today, Doodle celebrates Indian American poet and scholar Mina Alexander, who was known for her work exploring migration and identity. She's a poet, she's a scholar, and a writer, born in Allahabad in India and raised in India and Sudan. She later lived and worked in New York City, where she was a distinguished professor of English at Hunter College and the CUNY Graduate Center. She is being featured when you open your Google Doodle this morning, and her name is Mina Alexander. Billionaire Ankur Jain and former WWE wrestler Erica Hammond recently tied the knot in a lavish wedding extravaganza against the stunning backdrop of the Egyptian pyramids. He's the founder and CEO of Built Rewards and exchanged his vows with Erica in the presence of approximately 130 guests. And the celebrations were not limited to just the wedding day. The pre-wedding festivities were equally grand. The International Monetary Fund has projected that India's economy will grow by 6.8% in the current fiscal year, driven primarily by public investment. India's digital landscape is undergoing a significant transformation, fueled by the skyrocketing popularity of online interactive skill gaming. Recently, Indian storytelling through gaming has emerged as a new trend, offering a diverse array of narratives drawn from mythology, cultural heritage, folklore, history, and contemporary issues. Reversing early gains, benchmark indices Sensex and Nifty closed lower yesterday due to a sell-off in banking and IT shares in the last hour of the session amid a mixed trend in global markets. And we do have GST collections crossing 2 lakh crore rupees. Last month, the gross goods and services tax, GST, collections reached an all-time high, marking a substantial 12.4% growth compared to the same month in the previous year. Indian global capability centers have made significant strides in gender diversity, with nearly 5 lakh women currently employed in the sector, and this represents 28% of the total 16 lakh employees working in GCCs across India. Major banks like Yes Bank and ICICI Bank have changed some of their savings bank account fees and credit card rules starting from today. And the Godrejs have reached a settlement to split the $7 billion Locks to Land Development Group to better align ownership in acknowledgement of the differing visions of the family members. While Adi Godrej and his brother Nadir Godrej will gain complete ownership over the 5 listed entities of the Godrej Group: Godrej Consumer Products, Godrej Properties, Godrej Industries, Godrej Agrovet, and Aztec Life Sciences. Jamshed and his sister Smita will fully control the closely held Godrej and Boyce. Indian Oil Corporation will infuse over 1,303 crore rupees in its green energy subsidiary for setting up a 1,000 megawatt solar and wind power capacity at an estimated cost of 5,250 crore rupees, even as the company's March quarter profit more than halved from a year ago. A Delhi-bound Vistara airline flight today returned mid-air to Bhubaneswar 10 minutes after takeoff. The windshield of the aircraft cracked due to hailstorm, forcing the plane to make a priority landing. National Highways Authority of India planning to include wayside amenities in the design of new greenfield access-controlled highways to enhance the overall travel experience. And according to the current plan, these amenities may serve the purpose of drone landing, helipad construction, and opening retail stores to sell local handicrafts and fresh farm produce. And now the financial news from Pakistan. With payables touching almost $1.98 billion, the government in Islamabad is contemplating finalizing a schedule of payments to Chinese independent power producers before convening the 13th Joint Coordination Committee of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And this will be followed by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's visit to Beijing, and that is expected in the first week of June. President Zardari and Prime Minister Sharif today expressed the government's resolve to bolster laborers' welfare and safeguard their rights. As the world commemorated International Labour Day today, the President and the Premier issued separate messages to mark the occasion. With the country's fiscal deficit widening to 3.7% of GDP in the first 9 months of the fiscal year, the Ministry of Finance warned about the continuously increasing challenge of fiscal pressures driven by a massive 54% surge in interest payments. And the government in Karachi has raised 252.9 billion rupees through the auction of treasury bills yesterday. Tax collection by the Federal Board of Revenue fell short of the target by almost 63 billion rupees last month, mainly due to a drop in domestic taxes and customs duty. The Federal Board of Revenue has released a comprehensive list of 506,671 individuals who failed to file their tax returns for 2023. As a penalty, their mobile phone SIMs will be promptly blocked. As it blamed the caretaker government for causing a wheat crisis in the province, the Punjab government announced a vague policy that did not contain a date for the initiation of the procurement drive. And in exciting news for Ishq Murshid fans, the finale of Hum TV's hit series will be screened in cinemas across Pakistan. The theatrical release is scheduled for the 3rd of May, that is the day after tomorrow. And the final episode of the drama will be playing in multiple cinemas in Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, Hyderabad, Faisalabad, Multan, Sialkot, Gujranwala, Gujarat, Sargodha, Jhelum, Quetta, Sahiwal, Burewala, and Mandi Bahuddin. Now that's a lot of cities there. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the financial news for you. I do have your final segment of today's program on this first day of May coming up. Please stay here, and I'll be back in a minute. The final segment of our program today as we get this month started. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the 1st of May and I wish you all a lovely Wednesday. Let's get you some stories from the annals of history that happened on today's date, the 1st of May, way back in 1851. The Great Exhibition opens to wide acclaim in the Crystal Palace in London. Inside the Crystal Palace, a giant glass and iron hall designed by Sir Joseph Paxton, more than 10,000 exhibitors set up 8 miles of tables. Technological wonders from around the world were on display, but the exposition was clearly dominated by Britain, the premier industrialized nation and workshop of the world. Conceived by Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, the Great Exposition was a rousing success, hosting 6 million visitors before it closed in October. The many goods displayed range from kitchen appliances to false teeth, silks to farm machinery. Opened on today's date in the year 1851. And then on the 1st of May in 1852, the adventurer and performer Calamity Jones is born near Princeton, Missouri. The myths and fabrications concerning the life of Calamity Jane are so numerous it is difficult to discover her true story. Legend has it that at various times she worked as a dishwasher at Fort Brigade, a laborer on the Union Pacific, a scout for General Custer, and a teamster. Some claim that her parents died when she was only 8 years old, and the event led to her nickname Calamity. But serious historians have never found any solid evidence for any of these legends. What reliable records do exist indicate that she was born Martha Jane Canary and spent the first 13 years of her life in rural Missouri. And then she and her family moved west to the booming gold rush town of Virginia City in Montana. And there she grew into a tall and powerfully built young woman who liked to wear men's clothing and spend her time in the company of men. Like many young frontier women, she learned to ride and shoot at an early age, and she apparently bridled at the narrow limits placed on women in her era. She appears to have been out on her own and able to find occasional work out there. But given to hard drinking and carousing, she attracted public attention with stunts like riding a bull down the main street of a rapid city. Wherever she went, she brought along copies of her hopelessly inaccurate autobiography, which she sold to credulous fans for a few pennies. And one of the most persistent legends has been that she was married to the famous gunslinger and lawman Wild Bill Hickok, and that she may have given birth to his child. Yet again, biographies have been unable to establish any connection between the two. She was found sick and drunk in an African-American bordello in Montana and grumbled an uncharacteristic wish that the world would leave me alone and let me go to hell on my own route, she said. She died at the age of 51 on the 1st of August in 1903 in South Dakota. The adventurer and the performer Calamity Jane was born on today's date in 1852. And at Manila Bay in the Philippines, the U.S. Asiatic Squadron destroys the Spanish Pacific Fleet in the first battle of the Spanish-American War on today's date in the year 1898. Nearly 400 Spanish sailors were killed and 10 Spanish warships wrecked or captured at the cost of only 6 Americans wounded. The U.S. destroyed the Spanish Pacific Fleet in the Battle of Manila Bay on the 1st of May in 1898. And on the 1st of May in 1915 in The Hague in the Netherlands, the International Congress of Women adopts its resolutions on peace and women's suffrage. The Congress, also referred to as the Women's Peace Conference, was the result of an invitation by a Dutch women's suffrage organization to women's rights activists around the world to gather in peaceful assemblage during one of the most divisive and intense international conflicts in history, World War I. It included more than 1,200 delegates from 12 countries. And that the International Congress of Women adopted resolutions on peace and women's suffrage on today's date in 1915. On the 1st of May 1926, the Ford Motor Company becomes one of the first companies in America to adopt a 5-day, 40-hour week for workers in its automotive factories. The policy would be extended to Ford's office workers the following year, and Henry Ford's Detroit-based automobile company had broken ground in its labor policies before. In early 1914, against a backdrop of widespread unemployment and increasing labor unrest, Ford had announced it would pay its male factory workers a minimum wage of $5 per 8-hour day, up from a previous rate of $2.34 for 9 hours. And the policy was adopted for female workers in 1916. This news had shocked many in the industry at the time. $5 per day was nearly double that the average auto worker made, but turned out to be a stroke of brilliance, immediately boosting productivity along the assembly line and building a sense of company loyalty and pride among Ford's workers. So the 40-hour week started with the Ford factory workers on today's date in 1926. And on the 1st of May in 1931, President Herbert Hoover officially dedicates New York City's Empire State Building, pressing a button from the White House that turns on the building's lights. His gesture, of course, was symbolic. While the president remained in Washington, D.C., someone else flicked the switches in New York. The idea of the Empire State Building is said to have been born of a competition between Walter Chrysler of the Chrysler Corporation and John Raskob of General Motors to see who could erect the taller building. Chrysler had already begun work on the famous Chrysler Building, the gleaming 1,046-foot skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, not to be bested. Raskob assembled a group of well-known investors, including former New York Governor Alfred Smith, and the group chose the architecture firm Shreve, Lamb and Harmon Associates to design the building. And the Art Deco plans, said to have been based in large part on the look of a pencil, were also builder-friendly. The entire building went up in just over a year under a budget at that time of $40 million and well ahead of schedule. And during certain periods of building, the frame grew an astonishing 4.5 stories a week. At the time of its completion, the Empire State Building, at 102 stories and 1,250 feet high, was the world's tallest skyscraper, and the Depression-era construction employed as many as 3,400 workers on any single day, most of whom received an excellent pay rate, especially given the economic conditions of the time. And so the Empire State Building was dedicated on the 1st of May in 1931. The grip of the Depression was still evident a year later. However, when only 25% of the Empire State's offices had been rented out there. And in 1972, the Empire State Building lost its title as the world's tallest building to New York's World Trade Center, which itself was the tallest skyscraper for but a year. And today that honor belongs to Dubai's Burj Khalifa Tower, which soars 2,716 feet into the sky. On today's date, the 1st of May in 1941, it was Citizen Kane, now revered as one of the greatest movies ever, that made its debut at the RKO Palace Theatre. It had originally been intended to open at Manhattan's Radio City Music Hall, but months before its release, Orson Welles' landmark film began generating such controversy that the venue eventually refused to show it. And by the time he began working on Citizen Kane, the 24-year-old Welles had already made a name for himself as Hollywood's enfant terrible, his first found success on Broadway and the radio. His October 1938 broadcast version of the science fiction classic The War of the Worlds was so realistic that some listeners actually believed Martians had invaded New Jersey. Having signed a lucrative contract with RKO Studios, he was struggling to find a subject for his first feature film when his friend, the writer, suggested that he base it on the life of the publishing baron, William Randolph Hearst, presiding over the country's leading newspaper empire, ruling it from San Simeon, a sprawling estate perched atop a hill along California's central coastline. And that preview of Citizen Kane had drawn almost universally favorable reviews from critics. However, there was one viewer, the leading Hollywood gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, who was incensed by the film and the portrayal of its protagonist. She took her concerns to Hearst himself, who soon began waging a full-scale campaign against Welles and his film, barring the Hearst newspapers from running ads for it and enlisting the support of Hollywood bigwigs, such as Louis B. Mayer and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. It was said that Hearst was particularly angry over the movie's depiction of a character based on his companion. Marion Davies, a former showgirl whom he had helped become a popular Hollywood actress, and for his part, he threatened to sue Hearst for trying to suppress the film and also to sue RKO if the company did not release the film. And when Citizen Kane finally opened on the 1st of May 1941, it was a failure at the box office, and although reviews were favorable and it was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, Orson Welles was booed at that year's Oscar ceremony. It was only years later, when it was re-released, that Citizen Kane began to garner well-deserved accolades for its pioneering camera and sound work, as well as its complex blend of drama, black comedy, history, biography, and even fake newsreel or mockumentary footage that has informed hundreds of films produced since then. It consistently ranks at the top of film critics' lists, most notably grabbing the #1 spot on the American Film Institute's poll of America's 100 greatest films. After Citizen Kane, his diverse work consisted of everything from Shakespearean adaptations to documentaries, and some of the most acclaimed films included The Stranger, The Lady from Shanghai, The Chimes at Midnight, and in his later years he narrated documentaries and appeared in commercials, and left behind several unfinished films when he died at the age of 70 in 1985. Citizen Kane was released on the 1st of May in 1941, now revered as one of the greatest movies in history. And on the 1st of May 1958, the United States celebrates its first Law Day, one day after President Eisenhower announces the observance to honor the role of law in the creation of the United States. 3 years later, Congress followed suit by passing a joint resolution establishing the 1st of May as Law Day. The idea of a Law Day had first been postponed by the American Bar Association in 1957. The desire to suppress the celebration of the 1st of May, or May Day, as International Workers' Day, aided in Law Day's creation. May Day had communist overtones in the minds of many Americans because of its celebration of working people as a governing class in the Soviet Union and elsewhere. And the American Bar Association defines Law Day as a national day set aside to celebrate the rule of law. Law Day underscores how law and the legal process have contributed to the freedoms that all Americans share. The language of the statute ordaining May 1st calls it a special day of celebration by the American people in appreciation of their liberties and rededication to the ideals of equality and justice under law. On a day that in many parts of the world inspires devotion to the rights of the working class to participate in government, Law Day asks Americans to focus upon every American's rights as laid out in the fundamental documents of American democracy, the Declaration of Independence and the Federal Constitution. And the Declaration insists that Americans find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and guarantees the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that, ladies and gentlemen, was the first Law Day that was observed on the 1st of May, 1958. An American U-2 spy plane is shot down while conducting espionage over the Soviet Union on the 1st of May 1960. This incident derailed an important summit meeting between President Dwight Eisenhower and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev that was scheduled for later that month. The U-2 spy plane was the brainchild of the CIA, and it was a sophisticated technological marvel. Traveling at altitudes of up to 70,000 feet, the aircraft was equipped with state-of-the-art photography equipment that could, the CIA boasted, take high-resolution pictures of headlines in Russian newspapers as it flew overhead. Flights over the Soviet Union began in mid-1956, and the CIA assured President Eisenhower that the Soviets did not possess anti-aircraft weapons sophisticated enough to shoot down the high-altitude planes. And so on the 1st of May 1960, this U-2 flight piloted by Francis Gary Powers disappeared while on a flight over Russia. The CIA reassured the president that even if the plane had been shot down, it was equipped with self-destruct mechanisms that would render any wreckage unrecognizable, and the pilot was instructed to kill himself in such a situation. Based on this information, the U.S. government issued a cover statement indicating that a weather plane had veered off course and supposedly crashed somewhere in the Soviet Union. With no small degree of pleasure, Khrushchev pulled off one of the most dramatic moments of the Cold War by producing not only the most intact wreckage of the U-2, but also the captured pilot very much alive. Eisenhower had to publicly admit that it was indeed a U.S. spy plane. And that happened on the 1st of May in 1960. And on the 16th of that month, a major summit between the U.S., the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France began in Paris. Issues to be discussed included the status of Berlin and the nuclear arms control. As the meeting opened, Khrushchev launched into a tirade against the U.S. and Eisenhower and then stormed out of the summit. The meeting collapsed immediately and the summit was called off. Eisenhower considered the stupid U-2 mess one of the worst debacles of his presidency, and the pilot was released in 1962 in exchange for a captured Soviet spy. After enduring a brief but grueling stint as a bunny in Manhattan's Playboy Club, feminist writer Gloria Steinem publishes the first half of her landmark account, A Bunny's Tale, in the Show magazine on the 1st of May, 1963. Undercover reporting increased her profile and stripped back the glamorous facade of Hugh Hefner's empire to reveal a world of misogyny and exploitation. She was a freelance writer commissioned by Show to apply for a job at the Playboy Club under a fake name and document her experience. Ads for jobs as a server at the club, whose female employees were all known as bunnies, portrayed the work as something akin to paid participation in a party straight out of Playboy magazine. As she quickly learned, the truth was far uglier. An account was replete with examples of the toll the work took on the bunnies. A Bunny's Tale was one of the first feminist attacks on Playboy and the sexually liberated but male-centric lifestyle it embodied. Hugh Hefner tried to take it in stride, stating that Playboy was on the side of the women's liberation movement and asserting that applications to work at the Playboy Club had increased thanks to Steinem's article. Also ordered the club to stop giving new bunnies mandatory blood tests and gynecological exams, practices that Steinem had questioned in her article. Though it helped an early career, she established her credentials as a reporter and a feminist. She regretted the piece for years after it ran, dismayed by a slew of offers to take on sexualized undercover roles and haunted by photos of herself in the bunny costume, which had been taken during her brief time as an employee. Over time, however, she has said that she is glad she wrote a piece, an expose that laid bare the struggle of women who were more or less objectified for a living. That was Gloria Steinem publishing the first half of her undercover Playboy expose called A Bunny's Tale on the 1st of May, 1963. And on the morning of the 1st of May, 1967, in an intimate wedding before only 14 guests, music sensation Elvis Presley marries non-celebrity Priscilla Burlow in an 8-minute civil ceremony in a private suite at Las Vegas's famed Aladdin Hotel. The couple wants to keep the nuptials very private, so they ditch reporters by flying on a private jet from Palm Springs in the wee hours and arriving in Las Vegas at 4 a.m. The couple met while Elvis was 24 years old, stationed in Germany, where Priscilla's father was stationed as a U.S. Air Force officer. Their 7-year courtship, she was only 14 when they met, culminated when he gave her a 3-carat diamond engagement ring. At the wedding, he sported a black tuxedo while his bride wore a 60s-style loose white organza gown with long lace sleeves and pearl embellishments, bought off the rack by Priscilla, who tried to escape attention by disguising herself in a blonde wig and using the code name Mrs. Hodge. A 3-foot veil and rhinestone tiara perched atop her iconic black bouffant hairdo. The lavish wedding reception, which about 100 people attended, included a 5-foot-tall 6-tier wedding cake that reportedly cost $3,200. The bride and groom danced their first dance to what else? It was Elvis's hit ballad, and you all know which one that is. Love Me Tender. But we also do have plenty of his others that were part of that wedding that was held on today's date. and it was in the year 1967 on the 1st of May. That was Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender. That was played out there. We do have them flying to Palm Springs, where they stayed at a home dubbed the Elvis Honeymoon Hideaway. And the Presleys, as they were now called, adored as they were as a couple, did divorce in 1973. But Priscilla Presley, who became a businesswoman and an actress, said that she had no regrets.
Never let me go.
Elvis was absolutely the love of my life, she says, and there's no sadness about it because I have my memories and they're delicious and they're all mine.
And I love you so. Love me tender, love me true, all my dreams fulfill. For my darling, I love you, and I always will.
Elvis Presley, ladies and gentlemen, in Love Me Tender. In a last story that I have here that happened on the 1st of May 1997, after 18 years of Conservative rule, British voters give the Labour Party, led by Tony Blair, a landslide victory in British parliamentary elections. In the poorest Conservative Party showing since 1832, Prime Minister John Major was rejected in favour of Scottish-born Blair, who at age 43 became the youngest British Prime Minister in more than a century. And with Blair at its helm, the Labour Party went on to win 3 consecutive general election victories. He was re-elected in 2001 and 2005, despite his support for President George W. Bush and the war in Iraq, which was unpopular among many British. He served longer as Prime Minister than any other Labour Party member in history. Those, ladies and gentlemen, were some of the stories from the annals of history that happened on today's date, the 1st of May. I would like to thank all the supporters of community radio networks for making this program possible every morning, and huge thanks going out to Discount Power, to Houston EB5, to the Aluwalia Law Offices, the Wyndham Hotel in Irving, Digital X-Force in Southlake, Kinzer Law, Mike Kolachi, Ruchi Palace by Michaelachi, Shri Vimal, Vimal's Venue, Eggholic, Mystic Mandala, and Flashbrush Productions. For those of you who'd like to reach me directly, my number is 214-675-1754.